Welcome to the Industrial Control System Information Sharing and Analysis Center's monthly briefing. We'll take another minute or two to give those who are still logging in a chance to complete the process. During this time, I will provide some housekeeping notes. If you're calling in on the telephone, you will find a PIN number on the GoToWebinar application. Please enter this PIN into your phone and press pound, and this will allow us to manage background noise. My name is Debbie Wendell, and I will be moderating today's session. I serve as Community Director for the Center and oversee the Center's human-to-human information dissemination mechanisms. In case you are not yet aware of the full range of collaborative products we have to offer, make sure you check out our LinkedIn group, Twitter account, and website blog posts. Plus, we hope you will take full advantage of these member briefings and open forum discussion sessions. Our goal is to get our members accurate, timely, and actionable information in a way that best suits their needs. Today's briefing, Cryptography for Industrial Control Systems, features SafeLogic's founder and CEO, Ray Potter, as this month's subject matter expert, and will be hosted by ICS-ISAC Chair Chris Blask. During today's presentation, I have several polls, and now I am going to go ahead and launch your first one. What other briefings have you attended? That up there while I read some more housekeeping notes. Chris will take the first few minutes of the call to give a brief center overview and bring you up to speed on the latest developments from the center. Next, Ray will spend about 35 to 40 minutes for his presentation. And finally, there will be time for questions and answers and open discussion at the end of the presentation. Okay. Getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, and all right, very good. Thank you guys for your responses. And now some more housekeeping guidelines and your second poll. If I can get it up here. And I cannot get the second poll to launch, so I will just read more housekeeping guidelines. I will attempt to keep as many of you as possible off of mute so you can speak your thoughts or raise your questions as appropriate. But please mute your headsets or phones if necessary to help reduce unwanted background noise. When speaking, if you would please introduce yourself and indicate your industry affiliation. Additionally, if you would like to ask a question, you may also use the hand raise feature in the GoToWebinar application. After the meeting, a recording of this session will be available on the Center's website. Slides may be available upon request and at the presenter's discretion. Please contact an ICS-ISAC staff member for further information. So now, without any further delay, Chris, it's over to you for your Center update.
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you everyone for showing up today. So as Deb says, I'll spend a little bit doing some overview. I know we have some, we tend to have new folks on these calls. These are public-facing monthly briefings we do for members and non-members, and without being hopefully too completely duplicative for those folks who've heard all this before. But the ICS-ISAC has a mission to serve, which is to provide a forum and mechanisms for disseminating information and knowledge among stakeholders, particularly in the private sector, concerned with cybersecurity of industrial control systems. And the ISAC matrix, as we have seen it, exists in a horizontal and vertical framework, as you see here in this diagram, where there are vertical centers like in the electric sector, in the real estate sector, financial sector, research education network. The REN, I'll touch on a little bit later, is very interesting. But these ISACs, these information sharing and analysis centers, have arisen in one form or the other since the initial presidential directive in 1998. And there's a set of horizontal centers, like the National Council and the Multi-State, that bundle them together, and like supply chain and IT that speak to commonalities and risk across sectors. So it is in that logic that originally led to the creation of the ICS-ISAC. And there's people like Debbie and myself who are on the phone involved, and the other people we see on the screen, and others who have variously volunteered their time to help set up the center, and or are on the staff now that we have some stability and funding, and thanks to everybody who's been behind that. So when we look at industrial control system critical infrastructure issues, particularly from an ICS-ISAC perspective. We're looking cross-sector, we're looking at interdependencies. And while it's extremely important that we have a sector-specific focus, the electric sector is its own animal, as is water, as is transportation, and so forth. It's also very important that we understand that everything's connected to everything else. And there's this great study from 2001 from Carnegie Mellon that looks into this structurally, as if in case anybody needed validation for it. As you see in this diagram, looking at inside individual facilities, inside individual sectors, what are the failure scenarios and dependencies? As you look cross-sector, how does that connect? We all understand that you can't have power without, you can't have electricity without coal and oil and transportation to get those there, and the water to boil to turn turbines and so forth. But this is a very good study that breaks it down very specifically. You can see how we end up with the same sort of spaghetti diagrams. Those of you who work in the electric sector are familiar with the famous spaghetti diagram in that sector that looks at interdependencies and how things are connected. So that's the same across and between all sectors in infrastructure. And while we're still at this state, as the Goldilocks phase, as long as possible, where we haven't yet seen cascading failures across sectors due to cyber attacks. We have, in fact, seen cascading failures across critical infrastructure sectors. And just some notable ones in 1998, the day the pagers died, the quaint little satellite in space stopped working, and obviously that's a telecom sector failure. And those of us who remember actually relying on those little things we wore on our hips, cell phones were exactly all they were today, couldn't use them anymore, which was a problem for us in telecommunication. Everybody relied on that. But it also brought down sections of the financial sector. And this was probably one of the first instances where there was loss of human life because of these sort of cascading cross-sector failures, because there was loss of effectiveness and function across healthcare and first responders. And shortly thereafter, the California grid was a bit of a mess in 2001 for other issues, other reasons. There was rolling brownouts. A study done in that period shows significant loss in GDP, 32 million just in the state of California in adjusted dollars in 2012 dollars, and cascading impacts across industrial and manufacturing sectors and other energy sectors, oil and natural gas. Obviously, in 2003, when the whole East Coast went down, power grid went down, everything went down, and that was a long enough period of time we could see the trickle-down effect of other systems failing. And much less well-known, I just happen to know because I was living in the Santa Cruz Mountains in December 2011. We had a historic wind event, and it's a fascinating little personal example to see how things are connected, because power goes out. I live in the mountains and the trees, no big deal. I have a backup generator. I'm up. And then after 2 days, it was a 4-day blackout. After 2 days, Comcast goes down because they didn't have the right infrastructure to back up the equipment. They never planned on having their network out of power that long, so they go down. No problem, right? I've got an iPhone, I tether, still up and running, working from my home office, and everything's fine. On the third day, the data portion of the AT&T towers went down. Because they had never assumed that they'd have to go that long, and they didn't have the backup generation at the cell towers. So for the first time in 20-something years, after living in the middle of the tundra in Canada with satellite and blizzards and being snowed in for 6 days, I was finally completely kicked off the internet in the middle of Silicon Valley because of the cascading failures. And of course, in that period of time, when we start to see power out for 3-4 days, then we look at food and agriculture. Like the stores don't have refrigeration. Now all of a sudden everything's gone bad, and things spin out of control. So that classic comment, that no society is ever really more than 3 meals away from anarchy. We see in these sort of events when things start rippling across infrastructure. So as we talk about information sharing, we need to be very clear on what it is we're actually talking about sharing. And this is one of these points we always bring up, even in a little short updates like this one, because this is where a lot of the pushback has come over the last couple of years as we look at the legislative efforts to define how information sharing is done, as we look at the current cycle we're going through with the executive order, PPD 21, and the NIST framework RFI process that's underway now and will continue for the next year. It's very important that we understand what we want to share and that we have our taxonomy right, that we're using the right words. And any one of us who has spent any time looking at the legislation that's put out there and being involved in the conversations and the pushback of how you get asset owners, electric utilities, manufacturers, and others to share information, how you write legislation so that the needs of the public sector, the federal or state or local public sector is addressed. Understand the fine points here. So when we at the center talk about information sharing, we use this taxonomy you see on the screen, where data is the configuration of a device. It is a syslog message. It's an IDS alert. It has MAC address and IP addresses. It's a very specific atomic chunk of information. Information is everything. If I'm running an electric facility, if I'm running a water facility, manufacturing, then information in the context we're talking about is all of your data put together, the entire topology of your network, every event, every database, the SCADA controls, the information going back and forth, all of that. That's what you, if you're an asset owner, if you're an integrator working with asset owners, need to operate that system. That's really not what we want to share. What we want to share is knowledge of that information, and we'll talk about that in brief. But knowledge is, as it says here, is actionable shared intelligence, things that other people can actually use for their own purposes, not for your purposes, not to judge you, regulate you, fine you, whatnot, but to make their systems more secure. All of this fits into an emergent network that's been developing for many, many years, for roughly 2 decades. We can look at 7, 10 years at least for my involvement in it since we first noticed this sort of structure in the process of doing other things in late 2005, early 2006. And again, worth reiterating in this sort of context, so I'll apologize for everybody who's heard me say this 17 times already, but to fix this issue, to fix the issue that we're all here for, that this executive order has been issued to address, we need to create a situation where all of the appropriate folks have knowledge. And this starts at the asset owner at the bottom. If you as an asset owner know what you have on your control system, you know what it's doing, then you have knowledge. And you can use that knowledge. You have all the information it takes to have that knowledge, and you can run your shop securely. You can use knowledge people share with you. Bad things are going on in the world, they look like this. You can say, oh, I know what I have, I know what it's doing, therefore I can use those same abilities I use to create and maintain knowledge in my facility to take the knowledge shared with me and use it effectively. And you can share knowledge with others. You can share knowledge like, I'm an electric facility in the southeast U.S. I just had an experience, a good experience, a bad experience, whatever it is. And this is something other people should know. You can share that through service providers you deal with directly. There's a lot of large integrators that do provide a lot of services and staffing directly with facility operators. Those service providers end up being knowledge centers of their own because they have visibility and they have deep relationships where data and information, even the gory detail, can be shared comfortably because those relationships have been set up and been exercised well. And they have that across more than one facility. They can actually see what's going on at a broader level than the facility owners themselves. And it's shared with public centers, like at the U.S. federal level with U.S. CERT, ICS-CERT, the state level, state fusion centers, inside municipalities. One of our last month's briefer was the CSO for the City of Columbus, which is a great example. They've done great work there, but they have water and they have power and they have transportation and so forth. And they need to see what's going on even when these infrastructures may be privately owned. They need at least the knowledge. Are you under attack right now? Are you not under attack? Have you perhaps learned something wonderful that's good and would save money and and make everybody more safe. So the ISAC, the ICS-ISAC was created to focus on these sort of issues in that public-private nexus, specifically providing the private sector someplace we can get together to work on these issues and then work with the public sector for all those reasons. So as Debbie says, we look at knowledge sharing in two ways. There's human knowledge sharing like we're doing right now, which Debbie has a responsibility for, and has set up all these briefings and other things we do on a weekly, daily, monthly basis, and those are wonderful and very important. We also need to focus on real-time sharing or near real-time sharing, machine-to-machine. So this is always going to be a focus of the ISAC, and we'll touch on this really briefly before I get out of the way and let Ray do his talk. But we as a community, we as a nation, as an international community, have to build systems that will actually stand up to attack. That's the point of all this. And while human information sharing is critical, we need to train each other. We need to develop our workforce, including ourselves, not just students coming out of school. We also have to be realistic. And our opponents, attackers, will attack with all the capabilities they have. Those capabilities will certainly be more timely than human speed. They won't leave us the room where we can analyze what's going on, write up reports about it, send those as PDFs, post them on boards, have people read them, and take action eventually. So as appropriate, we need to develop systems where we have automated responses going on. And it generally looks like this, where some source of knowledge learns something. It could be a researcher, it could be an asset owner, it could the piece of knowledge, the knowledge packet, for some simple purposes, maybe there's people out there attacking on port 2468, and all you really need to do is look for that, because there's no valid reason you should see that on your control system network. Share that with another node like the ICS-ISAC, and then that node can then make routing decisions on that knowledge packet and share it appropriately with other centers, who will then share it with asset owners. So in this way, we can have national networks and regional networks and international networks where a single piece of knowledge shared in near real time will result in an electric transmission utility, like in the lower right there, for example, putting in a monitoring rule looking for traffic on a port. And if a single packet goes to that port, at the very least, the operators will be alerted, they'll be able to take responses, and they'll be able to have active defenses, which is the first obvious benefit of real-time sharing. There's actually a much more important emergent value that comes from this sort of sharing that is technically very simple. But at that asset owner, aside from just having a monitoring rule, it's also fairly obvious that if their systems automatically did a forensic report, looked at their logs, and provided them, their operators, the integrators they work with, whoever the case may be, the information that this traffic, this potential attack was seen first 6 months ago, and that over the last 6 weeks it started to trend up, and you're seeing it everywhere across your infrastructure. Over the last 6 days it's spiking. Now that's information that's very, very useful to that utility, and that's all of that data, all of that information, the MAC addresses, IP addresses, where it came from, what it attacked, what it did. This is the information they need to function. And they've had that information, of course, but it's been buried in their databases and in their logs, and it's been triggered, it's been catalyzed by that piece of knowledge that this particular kind of activity was known to be bad. Now, we don't want to share that information, and that utility probably doesn't want to share that information. Maybe risks in there, could be customer data, privacy issues, but the knowledge of that information can be shared. Basically exactly what I just said. At a electric transmission utility in, I don't know, the southeast states, perhaps an individual state, whatever. This particular attack was seen 6 months ago, and 6 weeks ago it trended upward, and 6 days ago it started getting out of control. That piece of knowledge shared with a center like the ICS-ISAC can be put together with the same sort of knowledge perhaps coming from water. where we can say, aha, not only has this been seen it's been found by a researcher in the wild, it's been seen over the 6-month period, in electric transmission. It's also been seen in water, but only over the last 3 months. It's starting to be seen in manufacturing over the last 3 days. That sort of knowledge can be shared, again, appropriately with other centers, public, private, and we get this feedback loop that is, literally the same as the feedback loop that's going on inside all of our bodies and biological systems. This is what keeps us alive and not, falling over dead from every virus that comes by, because something that's experienced in one place is put into an information system that's ramified back and forth. So we look to learn lessons from other folks who've been doing this sort of thing. The Research Educational Network, ISAC, strongly recommend anybody who wants to talk to these folks. They've done a fantastic job in achieving real value. They have a very effective, very simple system sharing 5 indicators that is saving hundreds of millions of dollars in education today. And they're sharing that technology with everybody else. With the ICS-ISAC, we're looking at leveraging that using CIF, using open bus architecture that EnergySec has been working on. There's a company, Palantir, that's made a very interesting analysis tool and sharing tool. There's a brand new system called ThreatConnect, threatconnect.com, that's very fascinating. Basically, a social network for analysts. And we, as one of our core functions, look to take these sort of structures, these technical structures and these operational analytical structures, and put them together with individual organizations like some of those folks you see on the screen and others. In the last 2 months, we've had some in-depth conversations with the folks you see on the screen and others, and are looking to, in this calendar year, create a reference architecture where we have multiple stakeholders sharing knowledge in real time for actual live implementation. And I know in our audience today we have a couple of folks from EPRI, and EPRI's making a lab that we're very interested in to look at knowledge creation and sharing at the utility level. So bringing these components together is the reason we're here. So last, before I get into our guest speakers' time, quick snapshot of where we've been. So this center was originally conceived in April last year, so we're coming on about a year from the idea. It was incorporated late last spring. Over the summer was put together. Again, we I personally appreciate, and we as a group appreciate all the time that vendors and stakeholders and asset owners and other people have put into the conversations of what this center should be and should it exist at all and what should we be doing and so forth. Through last fall, we had exercised some of the basic ideas and started these mechanisms. Debbie has been pivotal in over this last 2 quarters in the functionality and the effectiveness of the center up. We're now having these monthly briefings, these public-facing monthly briefings, third Wednesday of each month. This month we had a private briefing from Mandiant on their APT1 research, and have a couple of other of those coming up from other interesting organizations or members only among the trust group, people who've gone through the process of deciding to get involved. And working with, just this month, started some conversation with the MS, the multi-state ISAC, very interesting folks, and some of our members and researchers are out there about creating a virtual lab, a VPN accessible ICS lab that can be used for training and for research and for demonstration purposes. And so the ICS-ISAC and the MS-ISAC are going to put some resources into this. We've got some agreement from researchers to put some of their time and their expertise in VMs and so forth they built. And we're nailing down some last details, physically where do we put this thing and some of the, how do we operate and manage it. We'd like to have this. I think the logical frame for this is to have this something that's, you have to be vetted, quite well to have access to it. Members of the ISAC, one of the ISACs, and the right sort of folks. But we need to schedule it so that it can be reconfigured with physical devices and so forth for different research and demonstration purposes. So that's sort of where we are right now in the the direction we follow with everything, we have added the membership structure of the ISAC is very simple. We don't have gold, silver, bronze. You're a member, you're not. We based we're not accepting money from the public sector, so we fund ourselves by membership dues that go from very low for small organizations to, I think, reasonable for the very large. We only perform services, this one on the screen, if they're unique, provide value, and are something that structurally is needed. This initial assessment is very interesting. Fred Cohen, that most of you are probably familiar with, is an industry icon and had been creating an assessment architecture that Gardner Group and other people use for decades. And he has taken that and tuned it for ICS only. We worked with Fred to exercise this with the City of Columbus in December, and put together a discounted version of this so that we can do what we can to get larger scale access to the kind of organizational visibility that you can get for $500,000 with the very large consultancies. And again, one of the reasons the large consultancies are members of the ISAC, and we've consulted with them that we're not stepping on commercial space. The big consultancies can't do this sort of thing, and the other organizations just aren't. So the way this process works is it's a one-day interview. It's not on-site at all. Speaking with Fred or one of the people he's trained in this, it's really fascinating. It's everything from who you are as an organization, how you're structured, what management controls do you have, what technical controls do you have, what duty do you have to protect. Looking at the current state, and based on that, what a reasonable and prudent future state is for all these component pieces. And the entire process is finished in 2 weeks. Fred and his folks and the client spend a solid 8 hours on a web bridge and actually develop the questions and answers together on screen, so there is no ambiguity about it. And at the end of 2 weeks, Fred provides a 60 to 70 page report with details of where an organization is and where they should likely go. It provides a very good, simple, affordable framework that perhaps an organization would then take and engage with a larger integrator to execute on, multi-quarter, multi-year plans to remediate all sorts of wonderful things. So with all of that, just glanced, actually this isn't up to date anymore, but an idea of some of the people who were involved. Again, thank you to all of them and all of you. Let me just go straight into our guest speaker, Ray Potter, and throw to Debbie to do the intro, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris, for that overview and update. And now for this month's ICS-ISAC featured speaker. Ray Potter, a recognized thought leader in the information assurance space, has an impressive employment history, including stints with big names such as Ernst & Young and Cisco. He spent 6 years on the faculty of the Institute of Applied Network Security, where he served as subject matter expert, trainer, and facilitator for compliance and product security certifications. Following that, he founded the Apex Assurance Group, a security certification consulting company, and served as its managing director for 8 years. Now I have 3 demographic polls, and I'm going to try to start this next one here while I do some more of his intro. Today, Mr. Potter brings his extensive leadership experience encompassing technology, information security, project management, and communication to exciting new startup company SafeLogic. The creator of cryptographic engines used by major hardware and software vendors, SafeLogic stands perfectly poised to bring a fresh blend of information security services and disruptive products to the cybersecurity marketplace. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and share so we can all see. Okay, most people are from energy. Got some water, Kim. Okay, very good. So now you know who you're talking to there, Ray. Give you an idea of who's on the call. Ray, the floor is now yours. Please go ahead with your presentation.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for having me. Wow, that was quite the intro, Deb. I might have to borrow that, put that on my resume. You're too kind. Thank you so much. So again, thank you everyone for having me. My name is Ray Potter. I am CEO and co-founder of SafeLogic, which is a software company delivering crypto modules for regulated environments. And I'm excited to talk to everyone today. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with just a basic overview to cryptography. Keep in mind, I'm not a cryptographer, so this is not going to be a deep dive scientific analysis of different crypto algorithms because, frankly, I don't have the skill set for that. But we will do a bit of an overview there. I want to talk about some types of commercial cryptographic standards out there and algorithms, talk about some of the challenges associated with cryptography. Then we'll go into some use cases and some different compliance regulations in different markets. And I want to bring those up because I think it'll kind of start to give us a little bit of background and context as we talk about the ICS space. Then we'll wrap up with some just some open discussion. I mean, to be honest, I'd like to hear from folks on the call as well, and I'd like to not only get your reactions to what we talk about, but then also kind of hear from you in the field in terms of what you're seeing, what you're doing, et cetera. So let's just keep it open and have some fun. Sound good? Okay, so for a basic intro to cryptography, I'll say essentially the purpose is to instantiate what I'll call the pillars of security, right? This is the confidentiality, availability, and integrity. So the role of crypto in instantiating confidentiality is essentially to provide algorithms that provide encryption, okay? And what we're doing is we're protecting data. We're protecting someone from using, viewing, et cetera. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. There's symmetric encryption, which is basically two people have the same key, the same bit of information that can unlock that encrypted data. There's also asymmetric encryption. So you might have heard of public-private key pairs. So this is essentially where you use a public key to encrypt a piece of data, but then a private key, which is only known to one entity, can decrypt that data. For availability, there aren't really any cryptographic functions associated with availability. And now, availability is kind of what Chris was alluding to earlier, right, with taking down of power grids and things like that. So I'd say the use, I guess the instantiation of availability is more handled through protocols, physical security procedures, et cetera. And in some of these protocols, there may be underlying crypto functions, but on the whole, cryptography doesn't really apply to availability, in my opinion. But another key area it does is integrity, right? So this is making sure that the information you receive, for example, wasn't tampered or compromised in any way. And this is specifically, a use case you might think about is finance, right? So if we're wiring money, we want to make sure that we've got the highest level of integrity on account numbers, amounts, et cetera. But cryptography is not new, right? So I mean, even though we launched our company recently, there's been all sorts of to do about crypto and mobile and cloud and all that. It's certainly not new. I mean, it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, even going back as far as Julius Caesar and even further, right? But a common historical reference to cryptography is when Julius Caesar used something he called the Caesar cipher. Well, he didn't call it the Caesar cipher, but it was basically a substitution cipher, right? So if he was sending messages out to army or diplomats or what have you, the messages would be encoded, and essentially what it was a letter shift, right? So instead of just writing the message out in plain text, he would switch the letters kind of up 3 or back 3. So that was kind of the mechanism to decode the message was you just did the letter shift, right? And then we kind of saw that little resurgence back in the like the 70s or 80s with the little decoder rings, right, that came in cereal boxes. So that's actually cryptography, right? It's a very, very primitive form of cryptography now, but back then it worked. Excuse me, part of the reason it's considered primitive now is basically, with all the advancements of technology and processing power, we're seeing some of these algorithms get more and more complex because with the advent of multi-core processors, quantum computing, supercomputers, et cetera, it becomes a little bit easier to throw resources at trying to break an algorithm or crack a key or what have you, right? So it's not new, but it's always a progressing field, and it is relatively interesting.
Ray, I'm going to jump in here and run a demographic poll really quick here for you.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. Let's get an idea of some more about who we've got on the call. The company's primary function. Okay, give you guys another couple seconds here and close it, and let's see what we've got. So now asset owners, vendor researchers, service providers. Okay, very good. And then one more. See what everybody's job function is. Okay, give you a few more seconds here. Alrighty, and I'll share that one. Okay, very good.
A lot of others. More
Yeah.
people.
Okay, back to you, Ray.
Excellent. All right. So time to wake up, everyone. Let's keep going. So, so now what I'd like to do is kind of start to set the stage and talk about crypto algorithms are especially fun. They're testable, okay? So we can verify through some black box testing, or even more importantly, a third-party laboratory or a third-party accredited organization can go through and test and validate those algorithms are implemented properly. And then secondly, they're secure, right? So there's been sufficient cryptanalysis on these algorithms to ensure that they work, and they work properly, and there's nothing fishy behind the scenes. Now, one concern that always comes up is, well, if the algorithm is standards-based, and if it's a published standard, doesn't that weaken the algorithm? And the fact of the matter is it doesn't. And we don't have enough time to go into why, but if you went to go pull down the AES standard, for example, it would tell you how the standard works, and it would show you how the algorithm works so that it could be implemented. But it's designed in a way that you really have to know the input values. You have to know that key in order to break the algorithm, and the algorithm itself is pretty solid. So that's standards-based crypto. Now, there's also proprietary crypto, right? And these are the algorithms that aren't standards-based. They aren't really sponsored by federal government. They may be created by commercial entities, infamous cryptographers, et cetera. They may be very good. They may be very secure. They are probably testable, but I'll say they're risky, right? Because they're proprietary. We really don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And there's almost this mentality of, trust us, it's a good algorithm, right? Because, my name is so-and-so, or my company is this, trust us, this is a good algorithm. And that gets to be a little bit risky because, who knows, maybe there's a master unlock key that isn't published. You just never know with things like that, right? So a lot of people use proprietary algorithms, and just because I tend to have a bias towards standards-based, that's just kind of my perspective. And then there's also homegrown algorithms. This is always interesting, right? This is where you have like Joe's cryptographic algorithm, right? Where you've got an intern that has somehow claimed to optimize SHA-1, and it runs much faster and better. And I've seen so many instances of this, and it gets to be particularly frightening, actually. So as an example, we worked with a startup that they were looking to implement a crypto module, and we were doing a gap analysis on what they had. And it turns out they literally had an intern write a SHA, which is a secure hashing algorithm. They had an intern write that algorithm, and he thought he could do it better than what the U.S. government had published as the standard, right? And it turns out his implementation was woefully wrong. And not only did that lead to kind of insecurity of the product, but it also broke interoperability with products they were trying to connect to. Because one of the things about the SHA-any hashing algorithm is it's a one-way function. And what that means is you take a chunk of plain text data, let's say it's ABCD. If you run that through this hashing algorithm, it will always return the exact same byte string of hash data, of a message digest. Okay, so that's particularly valuable. Like I said, if you hash an account number, if you hash a dollar amount, the value is always going to be the same, assuming that implementation is proper. The advantage there is you can't go backwards, right? It's a one-way function. So because you have a 20, 60, 120 byte length of a digest, it is a one-way function, so you can't go backwards. But it was just particularly interesting because this company found an interoperability problem with their solution and didn't trace it to that. They were looking at much higher levels in the stack, and it turns out that was really it. So that's why I say, why on earth would anyone do that, right? There's so many examples of very good crypto algorithms out there that can be leveraged. And as we go to the next slide, the reason you don't want to do this yourself is frankly because the stuff is very challenging. Okay, it's cryptography can and it can't be easy, right? I mean, we've tried to make it easy with what we've done at SafeLogic, but underlying crypto really is pretty mathematically intensive. It's no easy task. You couple that with different environments in which crypto can reside. So we've got mobile environments that are constantly changing. We've got new OSs. We've got new operating systems being developed, like Ubuntu and all the other things going on, right? We've got new handsets coming out every 6 to 8 months or even more often. Then we couple that with changes in server and cloud environments, right? So now we're storing stuff in the cloud. Okay, where's the encryption taking place? Embedded systems, right? So now we're looking at things like smart grid and ATMs, satellites, right? All these different things are new and challenging environments for the crypto space. So the question about, I guess the real challenge with crypto is it implemented properly? Okay, and this is where we get to a discussion of security versus assurance. And the two are distinctly different, complementary but distinctly different. So for purposes of definition, security, I'll say, is basically using those pillars we talked about, confidentiality, availability, integrity, using those pillars to essentially mitigate risk or counter threats to your environment. Okay, that's security. Now, assurance is basically a measure of confidence or trust that a product or a function is doing something that it should, right? More importantly, not doing something that it shouldn't, right? So two distinctly different things. I'll give you kind of a use case. So some of you might be familiar, not hinting at any names, but different cloud-based file sharing tools that are out there that are all very useful, very convenient. If you go and look at them, they'll all say your data is secure, right? It's secure in our data center. It's secure up in the cloud. Well, that's security, okay, because they claim that they're using certain algorithms, and you know, I'm sure they are. But then the assurance question is, okay, how, right? How do I know that's secure? You say it on your website, that's fantastic, but how do I know that some IT admin on the back end doesn't have a master key to unlock all the data? You say you don't, but I don't know that, right? So that's where the assurance comes into play. And that's why this stuff gets particularly challenging in the mobile and cloud environments, because, you know, everyone says they're secure. If you go look at any, you know, web-based CRM tool, for example, they all say enhanced security. It's like, okay, fantastic. Well, how do I know that? And I tend to ask those questions, again, just because that's my space. I would venture 90% of users out there probably don't know or don't care, which is a whole other challenge we need to address.
Very true.
So if we move on to a couple of use cases, yeah, that whole security versus assurance, we could literally spend all day talking about that. And I'm happy to if anybody would like to. So let's go through and talk about a couple of use cases of crypto in industry. Okay, and I want to use this as a way to also introduce the concept of, you know, regulatory compliance, right? So I'm sure most of the people on the phone have you know, heard and dealt with regulatory compliance, and it is a big headache. It's a big challenge for many people, right? Whether it's, you know, product vendors, end users, et cetera. It is a big deal. So, and that's kind of, regulatory compliance really attempts to provide one manner to address that concept of assurance. Okay. So let's talk about healthcare very quickly. There's two things come to mind when we're talking about use of cryptography in healthcare. One is protection of patient records, right? So, and what I'm thinking about here is specifically data at rest encryption. So if we've got a bunch of patient data, charts, test results, you know, et cetera, all this is stored somewhere, and ideally that data is protected. It's encrypted somewhere on a hard drive, on a laptop, I hope, right? Actually, by law, it needs to be. We'll come to that in one second. But that's just one use case, right? So rather than just, you know, having it stored in plain text anywhere, it's actually stored in a protected way, such that only someone with proper access can decrypt that data and read it. Then there's also protection of, I guess there's protection of communications, right? So what I'm thinking about here is secure transport protocols. And I'll give you an example. So at SafeLogic, we're working with a medical equipment device manufacturer that basically has this capability to send X-rays over a wireless network to some central server somewhere, right? The issue is that communication needs to be protected, but then also that data needs to be protected. So their challenge is that it's not only enough for them to transmit that data over like a secure protocol like HTTPS or something that you might be familiar with on your browser, but that data, that encapsulation isn't enough. They actually need some deeper level crypto on the data itself, so that essentially they are using a secure tunnel to transmit encrypted data, if you follow that. And it's particularly interesting. It's a good problem set that I'd never thought about, and they reached out about it. I thought, oh, very interesting. The reason all this stuff comes up is because of this regulation called HIPAA. And yes, this is spelled correctly. It stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it's basically this act that was introduced in 1996. That its main purpose is to protect patient privacy. Okay, and in the healthcare industry, as we make the move to mobile and we make the move to cloud storage and all of this stuff, HIPAA compliance, HIPAA regulations are becoming increasingly, I think, difficult and challenging to meet. It's no longer just the lock on the file cabinet that stores people's data, right? Because I'll give you another example. So we went to the doctor for a checkup the other day with me and my daughter, and the doctor was making voice notes into her iPad as to when my daughter needed her next shot and all this stuff, right? But so that no longer is she really writing in that chart, right? She's dictating notes on an iPad that God knows where that goes, right? So in terms of HIPAA compliance, that doctor needs to be sure that that patient data is being handled securely, and so that's one area where we're seeing crypto. So I started to ask a couple of questions about it, but my daughter said, "Dad, can we just go?" I didn't think she really enjoyed being in the doctor's office. Actually, quick side note about my daughter. So I'll use her as a reference on a couple things. So she asked me this question of, what do you do, Dad? And I tried to explain a couple things, and I gave her a quick lesson on encryption. I said, let's say you've got your best friend is at the end of, you've got all the people in your class at are standing single file, and you've got a secret that you want to tell your friend at the end of the line, but you don't want anyone else to know about it. How do you do that? She said, well, I don't know. And I said, yeah, because think about it. If you go through and if you tell the person next to you, they might change it as a, like that game Telephone, right? So I said that's called data integrity. And then I tried to explain how she could come up with like a little way to encode her message, and I think I just lost her. But it was worth a shot. Anyway, sorry for the sidebar. But she's a cutie, and she does tolerate all my craziness.
Well, and Ray, this is Chris, and if I can just throw in here for a minute, because I think this is one of those points where we're starting to get into the collision of how we're using crypto in the outside world, how we're doing information security in the outside world, and how we're doing it in ICS. And there's a number of key concepts right here in this use case, and I know that we'll talk about them a little bit more going forward. But there's data at rest, data in motion, and regulations. And these are issues, in my experience with ICS, so historically, you go back before people were talking about security, and you've got, radios, on airfields and so forth, and they're secure. They're communicating securely, which means, it took Fahad, all of like 3 hours, to break the crypto on it. And you could see everything. And
right.
to one of your points of, I'm sure whoever, the person they brought on in the last 5 seconds to put crypto on that radio equipment thought it was pretty good, but times move on. Speaking to standards and everything else, and these major issues. I mean, this is where we're sort of at with the conversation in ICS when it comes to crypto. You start talking about data in motion. You start talking about latency. It's like you hear that you just don't understand. It's not like IT. If I add a nanosecond, if I add 5 milliseconds and the temperature peaks beyond this chemical vat will explode.
Right.
So we get those sort of issues. And picking another one, the data at rest. It's like, well, we know that a great deal of the penetration of these networks these days is not to bring them down, make them blow up, and more interesting things, is to steal the intellectual property. Quite often by other nation states who will go without name for the moment, but we can guess some of them, and that's very interesting. Where I'm a bad guy, I can hack into your network. It's a chemical processing plant, it's a manufacturing plant, and I can steal the data at rest and just use that because it tells me exactly how you do things. And funny enough, I can do those things at home myself that way. And then finally, of course, regulation. We're at this point right now where we've got the North American Electric Reliability Council, NERC, has put out regulations for cybersecurity in the electrical sector, and we love them, we hate them, we argue about them, whatever. There is a compliance or security, but we're moving, we've got the White House now and NIST pushing further, so the issue of regulations comes up an awful lot. And I know in one of the use cases you and I talked about before this, I've had a particular love-hate affair with airfield lighting systems, landing lights, for many years, and it's notable that one of the few pieces of pseudo legislation in that whole space, in how you do security and control systems at airfields, where you think, given the TSA and Al-Qaeda and 9/11 and everything else, we would have done something, is the vague suggestion that maybe if you're logging into landing lights at O'Hare or LAX, you may or may not want to use VPNs. You have to use a little crypto for transport. So
yeah, Chris, you're way off base, man. I mean, I take my shoes off before I go on the plane, so we're secure.
Yeah, that's right.
Come on, you're overthinking the problem.
Exactly. So this is really just where we are, and I think it's. I know with the folks we have on the phone, if we can get some of the questions out there, but I know these are the sort of issues that come up a lot. And if you don't mind, I'll advance. We'll advance slides here as well, because for time management, I know that you and I will talk forever on this stuff.
That's right.
But it's, in this, kick me if I was stealing your slide, but the public sector. So here's somewhere where these sort of things. Please go ahead.
All right. Actually, no, but it is good, and I do want to come back up and let's revisit that probably on the next slide when we get into going through ICS. Because yeah, I just want to run through a couple public sector things real quick, and then we'll move on. So. The thing if you think about from the healthcare perspective, patient data, patient records, that's all about privacy, and that's all fine and good. But then when we start to look at public sector and we're looking at national defense and intelligence, well, the threats are, and the effects are a little bit more extreme, right? I mean, we're talking about national security, we're talking about loss of life, and that also kind of plays into some of the ICS threats as well. So what's happening from, you notice I didn't mention anything about crypto in HIPAA because there aren't any real specified standards or best practices or anything like that. It's still kind of a growing field in terms of what to do there. Now, on the public sector, it's completely different. I mean, government's got this stuff locked down in terms of which cryptographic algorithms can and should be used. In the intelligence market, for example, when they're protecting classified information, actually they're using classified algorithms. So in all cases, they're not even using the standards-based stuff that we see on the NIST website. They're actually using NSA classified algorithms. But there is this move to leverage strong commercial cryptography within the intelligence community. So if anyone's heard of this trendy term, Suite B, this is what we're talking about, right? It's basically, a collection of algorithms that are deemed suitable for, processing classified information. And then obviously we've got state and local government concerns as well. Now I mentioned HIPAA for healthcare. Two regulations that come into play fairly often on the public sector side are FIPS 140 and Common Criteria. So FIPS 140 is essentially a validation program for cryptographic modules to make sure that they're implemented properly, they're handling keys properly, all sorts of other functional specifications, if you will. Common Criteria is a bit broader evaluation methodology for security products, right? And it's making sure that essentially a product acts as advertised. So both of these play back to that, security and assurance discussion, right? So when product vendors go through and claim things like FIPS 140 or Common Criteria, what they're doing is they're checking this assurance check mark on the security features of their product. So now that we've talked a little bit about kind of the new and growing field of crypto within healthcare, and then some of the regulations there, we've talked about how solid it is on the public sector side. Let's go through and look at the actual reason for the talk, which is ICS, which in my opinion, I'll be frank, I'm still learning the space a little bit. But from what I've seen, it's kind of it's lagging both the public sector and the healthcare side. Yet at the same time, there's almost infinitely stronger need and use cases for what we've been talking about. So, as with any space, we've got mobile devices creeping in, right? And people looking to remotely access ICS systems, which both pose a tremendous security challenge. Then we've got a couple of use cases, right? So things that Chris just mentioned about the FAA, just kind of frightening stuff if you think what's out there and what can be done, and how access to Chris mentioned the landing lights, or being able to telnet into an aircraft engine for maintenance and checking fuel levels and things like that, goes completely unprotected and unencrypted. That's actually quite frightening. And even more so, there's apps where you can download, you can point it up to the sky, and it'll tell you what plane is flying overhead, where it came from, what the flight number is, et cetera. I think that's just a huge threat. It's just amazing. Then we start to look at power and water, right? So I mentioned loss of life as a major threat with the public sector stuff. Well, the same thing happens on the ICS side as well. I mean, once we start, tampering with power, tampering with water, some really bad stuff can happen. And I guess the challenge that I'm seeing, and kind of what I wanted to open it up to the floor, and Chris, we can continue our discussion now, is that I'm not seeing any real regulation or compliance requirements on this stuff, right? I think it's probably coming. Not to say that compliance is the end-all and be-all of security, because if we have time, I'll make the case that it actually isn't. But it does provide some kind of baseline for security in different applications and different measures. So, in terms of ICS, I mean, we've been talking with a couple of folks, that I say are in the ICS space, but like I said, it's relatively immature, and like Chris was saying, what's the performance impact? What's the latency impact? What's the development challenge? All these things that we usually deal with on other spaces, but they're used to dealing with those problems, right? And here, like Chris said, latency can be a very big problem, right? Where if we are a couple of milliseconds off, boom goes the power grid, boom goes the chemical plant. And it's one of the things that I was hoping would get the community thinking around this. Do you remember? I guess part of the problem with ICS is it's not nothing has really happened to increase public awareness, and then B, I don't think there's just that general concern about it, right? So I think we're getting there, but usually it's one of those things, until something happens, people just kind of go with the status quo. And the reason I'm talking about all this is because I thought we were going to see some major traction after the Super Bowl, right? So if you're not familiar, at one point in the Super Bowl this year, the lights go out, the power goes out, and the gameplay was stopped for a considerable amount of time, right? And I guess being a security guy, the first thing I thought was, oh, boom, it was hacked, right? What a great idea for some hacker to get in there, shut down the Super Bowl, and essentially get the whole nation up in arms. Or you get someone who's trying to buck for more ad space, right? So the network's going to pay them to run more ads. So there's just, I don't know. I thought that was a particularly interesting event that I literally thought was someone hacking it, but I think what happened was someone just kind of tripped over a power cord or something. But anyway, I mean, so my take on ICS, before I turn it over to everyone, is that we're not really there yet in terms of crypto implementation, in terms of compliance, in terms of assurance. From what I've seen, there really isn't much out there. But part of the reason I'm excited to be a part of this community is to really learn more about it, right? Because I certainly don't believe I have all the answers. So, at this point, maybe we can turn it back over to Chris and over to some of the members, and just kind of share with me some of the things that you're seeing out there, what you're not seeing, and let's get a little bit of discussion going.
Absolutely. And And I want to encourage everybody else to, to raise your hands, ask a question. Deb's watching, and we'll take you off mute. And I may call on some of you that I know we're pretty chatty on these sort of things in the first place. But it's the reason we are having this talk is because this is another one of these elephant in the room issues we need to drive some conversation on. The kinds of things in the last couple of quarters that get raised. Slade has been using that talk about telnetting to jet engines in flight, and it's just a reality. It's just the way it is. If I hadn't obsessed with landing lights, 7 years ago, then I wouldn't really be aware of that one. But this is the state we're in. That with all of the focus on security, not even critical infrastructure security, post 9/11 airport security, the farthest we've gotten with critical infrastructure at all in airfields is a vague suggestion. It's just a guideline, not a requirement from the FAA that you may or may not want to use VPN if you're going to log into the landing lights. And I can walk you through that. The landing lights are connected, in fact, to the terminals and to everything else. Bob and his brother. So we haven't even gotten to the point where we're talking about authentication and encryption in the most fussed over pieces of critical infrastructure in the country. And then we get broader afield, as has come up quite often, we look at what we're doing in the power, in electric. We have what efforts we as a community have put on critical infrastructure have largely been in the electric sector. It's the electric asset owners tend to show up, some chemical, a little bit of water. But all you have to do is do a little Google to find that there are application vendors out there that are proudly advertising their customers' ability to manage shipboard systems on oil tankers at sea from their iPad at home. And still we'll have religious arguments about air gaps. We really shouldn't disconnect these systems to the outside world at all, and it'll be perfectly fine that way. So whatever the answers are to these things, they'll only come about in as much as the issue is discussed. We've got to get past very simple views, that we just shouldn't connect these to the outside world. But we are. They absolutely are and have been for decades. And the cost of taking that person with his or her iPad at home and putting them on a corporate helicopter and taking them out to a ship at sea, to do diagnostics and so forth, is so outrageously cost prohibitive that not only will we have people using remote devices to access critical structures, not just the electric substation around the corner, but ships at sea and intelligent oil fields on the other side of the world. So we have to do certain things. We have to have confidentiality. We have to have authentication. We have to have integrity and know that the commands going back and forth are actually the ones that were sent, which means we have to address encryption. And if there's issues of latency and so forth, well, we need to narrow that down and figure out where not to do that. And all of this, again, in the current environment of the executive order and everything else, we have to talk about regulations. Is there a certain point, while I think more than on average in our space, security people chafe against regulation by nature. It's just who we are. But at the same time, maybe you should be at least this tall to get on certain rides. Maybe you should not be allowed by somebody, to partake in certain activities that have a much broader effect than yourself. If, as Ray says, you're willing to hire an intern who thinks he's smarter than every other cryptographer in the world and write something from scratch. Maybe that's just not responsible. And we as a community, we as the community of individuals and organizations who actually know something about this, have to work through these issues. We have to talk about them, develop some opinions, or the regulations that will come out aren't going to be what we want to see. So it's an incredibly timely issue, and I don't know, Debbie, I haven't been watching. I don't know if any questions have come up. I'm willing to call on some of our usual suspects out there. You know who you are, John, Ernie. But Debbie, have any questions come
I
in?
don't have, nope, no questions, no hand raising, so go get them. See who you
I think we solved all the problems.
There
That's
you
awesome.
go. Good job, Ray.
That is good to know.
Fantastic. It only took an hour and 10 minutes. That's fantastic.
So,
No.
John McGuire, if you don't mind, I know you're not shy, to take you off mute and having, with your background, I know you and I have had these conversations about crypto before we've been involved with them. Do you have any thoughts or questions on topic you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I'm on a microphone. Also, just maybe not my laptop mic since you had muted me by surprise there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you said okay.
All right. So, maybe some of the things that come to mind, and one of the things we're looking into is this problem with a control system that's doing handling cryptography across a fairly wide network. They have hundreds or thousands of substations in the power grid, for example, or millions of meters deployed out in the field and handling keying and cryptographic functions for that. And I wondered if you guys had any thoughts along those lines.
So actually, your audio is coming and going. So I'll you can mute yourself back, or I can mute you. But your comment basically is that in the hundreds of thousands of systems. So scalability of cryptography, which Ray, I know is a problem in IT. You know, we're always struggling with scalability of key management.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that as we try to?
So I'll agree with the concern, right? In where you start to see it, especially on the mobile side, you see it, certainly within IT in terms of everyone trying to implement not only strong crypto, but then also maintaining interoperability and maintaining just kind of business operations, right? Because at the end of the day, as much as passionate as I am about this stuff, I realize it's a cost center, right? It's people aren't, I think we're one of the few companies that's in the business of doing crypto. I think everyone else is in a completely different line of business, where this just happens to be one piece of the pie, right? And I think in any space, security is always a cost center, and it's a it's a need to do at some point, but but it does tend to get into the way of normal business operations. So, I think one of the things that I guess on the SafeLogic side in terms of what we've tried to do is in terms of our product set, I mean, we've tried to accomplish a few things. One is having some solutions that are drop-in compliant for different regulations and compliance standards out there, but then also making it very easy to deploy, because like I said at the very beginning, security and crypto are both very hard, right? And I think the easier we can make someone's life in terms of doing an actual implementation, the better it's going to be. And then at the end of the day, the more secure everyone's going to be. So, there is that kind of, as corny as it sounds, there is that kind of, I don't want to say saving the world, but it's really trying to protect what's out there and provide people an easier way to address the problem. So, that was a whole bunch of rambling that didn't really address the point, but it's just a few other thoughts that I had. I mean, it's.
Well, I would, and we've actually we're getting into. We try to get this talk under 90 minutes. We have 50 minutes left, so we'll try to move it forward anyways. But there are important points I think that are worth capturing out of this, and exactly right here, that we start to look at the combination of things. So we all care about this, as we all know all the time. This is the defining characteristic. If you're involved in this industry, you personally care about it. You want the bad guys not to win. And unencrypted traffic telnetting to jet engines and airliners in flight is problematic. There's certain parts of these things that just have to be fixed. So as we work through them, we have to, I think, be very adult about this. In some cases, it may mean that, to your point, Ray, that this is a cost center that nobody's going to do until perhaps you're not allowed to do it by regulation unless you encrypt.
Yep. Or something happens, God forbid. Right.
or something happens when it's now a problem. And this is frankly exactly how we managed to sell crypto and VPNs into the IT space. People did not adopt that technology to be more secure. They adopted it because it made it more profitable, because they accepted the idea that remote workers accessing their corporate secrets had to have VPN tools, and that would be lower cost, higher productivity, more profitable. And while the IT security industry is still, frankly, not the most mature thing in the world. It's not a century old. It's not 1,000 years old. It's 10 or 20 years old. However, there are certain lessons we've learned in that space that we need to learn in ICS, which is generally more mature. The industrial space is generally more mature. But as we apply security of all types, as we look at cryptography or any other security tool, we have to look at actually what motivates the people involved. If you're an executive of an asset owner, you're by definition not as qualified to know if what we're talking about now is as big a risk as something else. So it may be regulations. Maybe regulations have to be done. Maybe how we talk about things and where we position them. To John's point, scaling keys is still a problem. PKI is still, at least as far as I know, still an issue, right? So maybe we can't do it. Maybe we shouldn't be pushing for crypto in a lot of applications where there's 1,000, 10,000 endpoints in ICS. But we should focus our efforts and make sure that at least in these cases it's done at least in those ways.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Well, I know there's a couple more slides to share from the ICS perspective, so I'll kind of wrap up my piece here. I already kind of mentioned SafeLogic, what we do. Again, just providing crypto toolkits that kind of address both the secure and compliant aspects of what we've been talking about. And we do that just basically by trying to understand the impact to our customers, both in terms of development, but then also policy, regulations, all their changing environments. Procurement requirements is always a big thing, especially in the public sector, right? So we try to help our customers by positioning a crypto toolkit that will allow them to, say, sell into Army or into Intel or something like that, right? And by Intel, I mean intelligence. And we just basically address these issues on our product roadmap and a couple of new things we have coming down the pipe. So anyway, so that's about it for me. Thank you so much for having me. I know we didn't really spend too much time diving into crypto and ICS, but I think we all kind of knew coming into it that it was more just kind of scratching the surface, right? So I just wanted to provide you a couple of other details on what's happening within other industries and how other some other use cases, how they're attacking the problem, and then hopefully altogether from an ICS perspective we can lay some groundwork and make it a more secure industry as well. So so there's my email contact, Twitter handles, all of that good stuff. In case you're interested, so the SafeLogic co-founder Wes Hagaki and I wrote a book on FIPS 140 not too long ago, and we do provide a nice intro and overview to encryption and cryptography and things like that. But we take a pretty deep dive into FIPS 140, which is one of the cornerstone compliance requirements that our crypto toolkit adheres to. So so it's available on Amazon.com, but if you, for any attendees that are on here, feel free to reach out to me and I'll send you a signed copy if you're interested.
Well, thank you very much, Ray, and I think there is an indicator. I know in my time that I spent with you since you started SafeLogic, one of the things that sticks out as we're looking at what you folks do and who you do it for. I think it'd be interesting if you want to share, what sort of companies you're working with. Because I was surprised, that among the points is that people aren't studying crypto. We're not getting a lot of new crypto folks these days, and I think that speaks to the state of cryptography use in the market, in the space, and says something about expertise and ability to develop these tools for use in ICS.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're exactly right, and there's not much of a focus on that anymore. I mean, frankly, there are obviously other crypto toolkit vendors out there that we compete with now. But I think that the gaps that we've seen are twofold. One is an ease of implementation, and two is adherence to different compliance requirements, right? So I think that's the challenge we're trying to solve, is to make this stuff drop in easy, but then also have it address different regulatory compliance concerns, because that's a huge problem. So you mentioned who we work with. I mean, two of our top tier customers on the SafeLogic side are Symantec and Juniper, right? So we're providing the cryptography for the Juniper Pulse mobile client that's connecting to their SSL VPN gateways. That's all SafeLogic underneath. On the Symantec side, we're on their mobile device and mobile application management solution, the Nucona acquisition. So we're doing all the, providing all the crypto there. So then we've got a couple of other startups that we work with, and some other kind of major folks that are deploying into DoD and DISA and Intel that are running our stuff for remote access or secure management or what have you. So even though we just came out of stealth, I think about 3 weeks ago, we've been charging pretty hard for the last about a year, just trying to build this stuff and get it out into the market. So so that's what we're seeing. And we've got like I think I kind of alluded to, we're working with a couple with one medical device manufacturer who's concerned about transmitting X-rays and other patient data over networks. So so I think we'll make some inroads into the ICS space as well. And it's I'll throw this out there. If anyone on the call or in the space ever has any questions about what's happening from different regulated industries or in the world of crypto or what have you, just feel free to reach out anytime. It's always an interesting discussion, and I think like Chris and I always say, we all have to help each other, right? So so even if we're not formally working together, it's always nice to meet new people in the space. So so feel free to reach out anytime.
Great. And so thank you, Ray, for all that. And as we know, the purpose of these calls is to start discussions and keep conversations going. We're not trying to solve all the world's problems, but making these connections. These are the human connections. So for the people who've seen this on this call or watch us later on, know that Ray's out there, and if you're looking for expertise and folks who can help you with these sort of things, there's another spot. And last little closing bits. So this center exists because of the involvement of its membership. We thank everybody who's been involved, like Ray and everybody else, a lot of folks on the phone. And this is a public session, so some of you on the phone are not members. If you see benefit, feel free to sign up with us or suggest topics. You don't have to be a member to provide these sort of talks where you have subject matter expertise that has benefited the community. It's in our mission to try to get that out to other folks. We get a lot of benefit from people being involved. An organization like this really is its members, and we're saying that there's 4 major areas where members provide value. One of those is funding. Also, it's just the size of the community, the number of people speaking. It's knowledge that can be shared with us that we can then create derived knowledge from or share directly with others. And it's taking knowledge that the center either creates or acts as a conduit for and uses it out in the outside world. And we understand that organizations in any demographic may be only able to do a couple of these. We're interested in engaging with them anyways. Some organizations will never be able to provide funding. Maybe that's fine. Some organizations will never be able to share anything. Maybe that's fine as well. Most organizations at least should be able to take the information shared with them and make the world a slightly better place to be, which is good because it is, of course, a shared future. We're all going to be connected in this increasingly interdependent world forever. And as we develop expertise in ourselves, in our organizations, in the segments of the market we work in, we all benefit when that knowledge is shared amongst everybody else. So please, stay in touch. We have these monthly public briefings, third Wednesday at this time every month. Each one, these are GoToWebinar events, as you all know, because those of you who are here registered for them. So you can find this on the events section of the website, and you can sign up for that. Next month, Dave Tuman from the American Public Transportation Association is going to be talking about ICS security and rail transit, which I think will be very interesting. And future months, I think in April, we have Bill Nelson, the chair of the financial sector ISAC. Is going to be speaking about the evolution of information sharing. And they've been at this for a decade or so, unless I got the schedule wrong there, Debbie. But each month we have these public sessions. Every week we have members-only sessions. Some of them are open sessions where we just talk amongst ourselves and the topic of the time. Some of those have speakers who want to talk only inside the trust community that we've created. So however you feel like being involved, the fact that you're hearing my voice at all, it means that you do at some level, and we thank you for all of that, for being who you are and being involved in this community directly or indirectly and making the world a slightly better place to be. So with that, I'll be done, and Debbie, if you want to dance us out of here, then we'll let everyone go for the day.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Ray, for your interesting and informative briefing. And on behalf of all of us at the ICS-ISAC, we appreciate your joining us today. We hope that you found the information of value and something that you can take and implement to further secure your industrial control systems. As a reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be available on the ICS-ISAC website. Our next briefing will be held Wednesday, April 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern and feature Dave Tuman, President of Tuman Technical, presenting Industrial Control System Security in Rail Transit Control and Communications. That will be followed the next week by Fred Cohen leading a panel discussion on the new ICS initial assessment tool being offered by the Center. In June, we have Waterfall's Andrew Ginter discussing unidirectional gateways. Other sessions will be announced in our monthly updates, on the Center's website, and in our other communication vehicles. Thank you again for your participation on today's call, and we hope you have an awesome rest of your day.